Alrighty. Good morning, Hawkeye fans. Harrison Star, aka HD underscore star on Twitter, joined by Thad Nelson. Thad, how are you doing on this lovely, at least where I'm at, this lovely Saturday morning?
Yeah, it's a good morning. Feels kind of odd to not be getting right into my game day rituals with an evening game, kind of going slow into it. So just playing with the kids, and we've got a bunch of rain here this morning, but it'll clear out and be a nice day.
Fantastic, man. Fantastic. Uh, I don't necessarily want to get straight into it with the Iowa offense because I feel like that's a horse that we've pretty well beat between Ben and I talking on the Pants Party. I thought you and Rob did a really nice job talking about it on All Eyes podcast earlier this week because I was just kind of, I said I don't want to do it, but now I'm about to do it. I was just thinking, I was just kind of going through, the Rolodex of past Iowa seasons, and Iowa's had bad offense before, but I don't know that we've reached like this level of despair. And obviously the numbers bear it out, but like you look at 2009, 2004, neither of those offenses were particularly good. But at least you always felt like Iowa had a chance there. And that's I think where the immediate frustration with Iowa fans is right now after, a season of um, an off season of, oh, there's going to be change, and then it there was change, and it's not as good. But I guess we can maybe start with the offense quick, and then move to maybe some other storylines.
I'm I'm with you completely on that, and I think a lot of it is it's just felt like kind of a slow drip ever since the 2020 season where Iowa was playing really well at the end of the season. 21 things start off. Offense doesn't look great, but they're winning games and they're figuring it out. And really, since the middle of last season, it just feels like this slow drip of things aren't getting better. We don't see where the improvement is going to happen. Last year, think, okay, some of those young receivers are taking some steps. Maybe there's some progress there. We like some of the freshmen. Um, Charlie Jones was emerging as a wide receiver 1 or 2 candidate, and
There's that
then
name.
oh yeah, um, but then it's just all fallen to where if you watch this offense, there's nothing where like, oh, I like this piece. Oh, I like that piece. It's so disjointed right now. And I think this fact that everybody's just watched it slowly kind of turn into this has just put people off. Um, and obviously, I think the other part with this is there's been this brewing thing with Brian at offensive coordinator as well, and it's all just kind of manifested itself into this really ugly start to the 22 season.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that distills it really pretty well. Hopefully, we get Keegan and Nico Reganey back. I know that Gavin Williams, I saw earlier this week, he's really heading towards 100%, or at least as close to 100% as running back can be. So I think that that's good news because as you said, like there were some pieces to like last year, and I think the one kind of mea culpa I kind of have to make is like I was the one who was Connor Colby. I thought he was probably could be the best player on this offense, and I wanted him at tackle, and that is an experiment that has not necessarily worked just yet. But I'm not holding out hope, or I'm holding out hope that that this is the type of thing that he's in a little new position, uh, and maybe by week 7, week 8, we start to see the line coalesce. All of them should be back next year, with the exception of maybe Jack Plum. So I think that if there's hope to hang on the offense, it rests with that line and it just turning into one unit and transforming from what they are now to something better by the end of the year, and maybe something really pretty good by beginning the next year, just because you look at the recruiting stars, you look at kind of the builds of the linemen, and it's different than kind of past lines that we've seen. We don't have necessarily the, the star of it like a Tristan Wirfs or a Tyler Linderbaum, but maybe in some respects that might help build that continuity over the course of this year into next.
The long-term pieces at offensive line I like, and I'm with you with Connor Colby. I think he has a chance to be a productive right tackle for this team. And they're playing, they're playing essentially in their top six rotation, three guys that are second year on campus. Two of them missed a lot of last year with injuries in Stevens and Dunker. You've got a center who's transitioning from defensive tackle, and it worked perfectly and seamlessly with Linderbaum. And I think we all are like, oh, yeah, that worked. We'll do it again. And I still think Logan Jones is going to be really good at that position, but there's going to be some hiccups along the way. So I like the pieces that are there. You mentioned they've kind of changed who they're recruiting, and over the last 3 or 4 years, we're seeing different body types that I think are going to be good for Iowa going forward. I'm with you. I think by week 7, 8, this offensive line looks better. I thought there were some moments last week where we saw some improvement in different areas, but the offense just was not able to retain the ball, and they missed so many of those short, like what we always call those easy, just like pick up 3 or 4 yards with the pass, kind of extend your run game with that short pass game, and they're missing those, which then is just putting them in a bunch of troubles. But I'm with your original comments. I was glad when you said that, because I was thinking this morning, the offense obviously has been a major frustration, but I still have my enjoyment of watching this team from the defense. I think this defense has been phenomenal, both in their play and just what they've been able to do. So I'm glad that you mentioned kind of getting to that, because I still really enjoy watching the defense play, and it hasn't taken my love for watching the team at least one half of the ball right now.
Yeah, that's actually a great transition into kind of what I was looking for out of today. And 2 weeks ago, I was like, oh, I was getting a little cocky. I'm like, hey, can I always show an identity? Last year, I think we were both spot on, or last week we were both spot on, just knowing how weird the game was going to be, and it certainly lived up to the weirdness that I was expecting. But I think from what you said to me today, what I would like is a net enjoyable experience watching the Iowa football team. I think Nevada has some interesting pieces. I wrote earlier this week that they've got one defensive back who has 4 interceptions through 3 games. He's taken one back for a touchdown. I think that is a little scary when I think about Iowa on offense. But from a defensive perspective, I'm looking at some of the Nevada numbers, and it looks, to me, that's where, as you said, most of the enjoyment comes from watching Iowa football. The next portion is Tory Taylor, and there was a great story by the Daily Iowan who kind of detailed his family's, travels and staying in Iowa, and they'll be here for a few weeks. So I thought that's a great one. Chloe Peterson wrote that. But overall, I think from a defensive perspective, what we haven't necessarily seen Iowa do, and part of this is Iowa's offense giving it right back, but we haven't seen a positive turnover differential yet this season. And that has been over the last 2 years with kind of the current infrastructure in place, and really throughout, the last 5. But that has always been the key metric in terms of if Iowa is going to turn the ball over less than their opponents, they're probably going to play pretty well, and it's going to be an enjoyable experience for everyone. So that's definitely something that I am hoping Iowa can get back to this week. But Nevada, on the flip side, they haven't really turned the ball over against the non-FCS teams. They have no turnovers in those 2 games. They have 2 fumbles against Incarnate Word. But I think if Iowa can, flip field position, maybe take advantage of a little lighter defense, and maybe we do see that run game get going with Gavin Williams as kind of the lead back. To me, I think that the pieces are in place for this to be a broadly speaking, more enjoyable evening.
My hopes defensively is if you can put Nevada in a situation where they're having to uh, pr- uh, press, I guess maybe is the best word I can think of on offense, where uh, Iowa can somehow get a lead by multiple possessions and force Nevada's hand on a few things. That's where I feel like this defense really shines in years past. Is they get a lead and they're able to dictate what the offense has to do. And that's where I feel like you get those fumbles on somebody trying to get a few extra yards, or the tip pass over the middle on a second and long or third and long that gets intercepted and either returned or put into a good position. I feel like those are the situations this defense can do, and the things that this defense can do against Nevada. And as you said, game one, Iowa wasn't able to force any turnovers. South Dakota State did a really good job. I think there was maybe one fumble, but went out of bounds, or they were able to recover it. So hopefully, a few turnovers can help. But just getting to watch this defense and how they move and how the pieces just work. If you think if the offense lost somebody of Justin Jacobs' ability, it's just things fall apart. And what does Iowa do on defense? Well, okay, so uh, Cooper DeJean just slides over from splitting time at corner, and he just slides into that role, and they just keep doing what they do. So I do think we'll see that Iowa pretty much in cash the entirety of this game, which for me personally fits the current personnel with Jacobs out, still with the hamstring issue, fits this group really well. And I think we can see some of those turnovers. And I also think this defense has a chance to get a couple sacks and put Nevada in some long situations, forcing their hand into some true pass situations.
Yeah, you really nailed it there, Thad, because when I think about last week especially, like the thing that Iowa struggled with, and obviously there was the 99-yard drive, but I think overall their inability to get those 3 and outs, to get Iowa State behind the chains, that was definitely something I think, you know, you're very high on Hunter Deckers as both a runner and a passer, and I think, in some ways Iowa over-indexed on him as a runner just because he was so unknown in kind of those abilities. I think with the 6'9" Nate Cox, there's not necessarily that fear um, from Iowa for the Nevada quarterback. And I think that, to your point, if Iowa can get themselves in strong positions of putting Nevada behind the change, that's where we see the most fun out of an Iowa offense, not the dinking and dunking that happens from time to time against them. That's never fun to witness, because there's a level of inevitability to it. But I think this team sets up for Iowa to do what they do best as a defense.
And with that, I'm also hoping to see out of the defense. I just want to see, hopefully, they can get some of the D tackles a little bit more rest. I know Noah Shannon was in and out of the lineup last week with an injury, and Logan Lee had to play, 71 out of 80 snaps. And there was some talk, is that sustainable? And Coach Bell said, yeah, he trained with the linebackers, but you don't want to go into the Big Ten season with one of your main defensive linemen playing 85% of the snaps. That's not going to be good once you get into that meat of the Big Ten schedule. So hopefully they can get some rotation there. It'd be a good way to get Lucas Van Ness a few extra reps. He's right now at probably about a 55, 60% of the snaps rate. And I think getting him closer to 65, 70%, whether it's at D end where they have a little more depth right now, or some more reps at D tackle, I think would be really good. And against a team like this, I think he could feast at either position. I see this as being a 1.5 to 2.5 sack game for Van Ness.
I'm hopeful because, I think he's been someone that had shined obviously last year, and then the 2 punt blocks this year, the almost field goal block against South Dakota State. He's had those kind of wow plays but from a straight defense perspective, I haven't necessarily seen as much of him as I would like. That doesn't say he's not doing his job. I think for me especially, like watching defensive linemen, it's always tricky to know who's doing well because like when a defensive tackle is doing well, you're probably not hearing their name. They're sucking up two blockers, and Jack Campbell, Seth Benson are cleaning up whatever's happening. But Shannon was someone who was great in the first game and injured in the second. The Logan Lee one I think is a great point though because it's that type of workload is sustainable until it isn't. And like I think against South Dakota State, these first three games, certainly he can be out on the field for 70 plays a game. But when you're getting into those bigger linemen, especially as I think like in Illinois, like they are huge offensive linemen, um, it's going to wear down, no matter how well conditioned you are. So definitely getting that rotation in there is definitely something that I am hoping to see Iowa do a little better job of this, this game. And I had another thought, Thad, but I'll turn it over to you if you've got anything that's on top of your mind while I try and remember what I was thinking.
The other thing to think about too is with the defensive linemen, as the game has become more horizontal, it also puts additional stress on those defensive linemen because it's a shotgun snap for many of these teams, and there is a lot of horizontal motion, whether it's throwing out wide, whether it's some of the zone read that's trying to get outside pressure. Linemen are having to play side to side more in modern football than ever before. It's not just plug up the middle. It's not just maintain that rush lane. You're rushing the passer more, which takes more energy, and you're chasing side to side more as well. So that's the other part of this. I just don't think Iowa wants to be in that situation. I think that's a good change they made probably 5 or 6 years ago of getting more defensive line rotation. And I think that's something that they've worked on. And, I think it's something that I'd like to see a little bit more of today going into the Big Ten season. And if you get late in the season and you need to be a little more one-dimensional with who plays, that's fine. But in a game like this, you should be able to rotate. And Iowa is deep enough at all of those defensive line positions to keep guys fresh.
I think that's something we've talked about in the Slack a lot, Thad, is Iowa's defensive line recruiting. To me, it is so much different than 10, 12 years ago because the defensive line they had back then, where it was Claiborne. I don't even think Adrian Claiborne would be a defensive end how he was built in 2022 Iowa. Now obviously he was a great player and a great defensive end for Iowa, but it's just as the game has moved, I think Iowa has been really good at adapting the types of bodies that they get at defensive end and defensive line in general, and just using a number of different bodies. Like Deontay Craig is, I don't want to say tiny because he's huge relative to me, but when you stand him next to other defensive linemen, he and Joe Evans especially, like they're not your classic defensive lineman builds, but Iowa still gets a ton out of them in that rotation. And this is also something we've talked about is like by being able to rotate, those guys are able to give better effort, more often. And I think that is been a pretty big key for Iowa over the last 3 to 5 years. And I think definitely seeing someone maybe emerge in kind of that fourth spot. I know Louis Steck's been out there a little bit. We haven't seen much Aaron Graves, and I think that this would be a great time for him to maybe make a name for himself if he kind of emerges into that defensive line rotation.
That's the one that I think we'll see more of today, especially knowing that it depends on the health of Noah Shannon, but last week he had the injury that occurred during the game, so he had to come out, and they probably weren't planning on Graves as much. But now this week, I feel like you can go in saying, all right, let's try to get some of those young guys a few additional reps. I think Kirk in his weekly presser mentioned the possibility of Pittman. I'm blanking on his first name, but he's another freshman that they talked about possibly playing in this, and this will be a great time if Iowa can afford to get him into the game, to get one of those freshmen who can still redshirt by playing a limited number of games. It'd be a great time to get somebody like Graves, who probably isn't redshirting, and then somebody like Pittman, who is. If you can rotate those guys in a little bit more, and also give them some reps during the week as well, would be really good. Just so they are really key on when they play. Here's their limited defined role.
Yeah, and then I think from a rotation standpoint, Iowa has a number of defensive backs that they can play. But I think is this the day we see maybe a Xavier Wongpa sighting? That's my question, as my son is excited for Xavier Wongpa.
Yeah, I think we've seen TJ Hall and Xavier Wongpa get in special teams and have a role there on some different coverage and return teams. Yeah, this is a game, most seasons you go into this and say, oh, great, this is the game where I can't wait to get to see some of the younger players and what they look like and what their role might be as they go forward. But going back to what we talked about to open this up, I think a lot of fans are worried that this is going to be halftime and it's going to be something like 13-3. And mid third quarter, it's 16-3. So all of a sudden you're sitting there going, okay, like I really want to see those guys, but you're, especially defensively, you're one play away from being a field goal game or a one possession game maybe. How much do you risk that if you're in that situation, which is obviously there's already a lot of pressure on this offense with their struggles, but I think it's really amplified, which sounds strange in a game like this, but I do think it's amplified because everybody's saying, okay, here's your chance. You're playing Nevada. They're just coming off of a loss to Incarnate Word. Here's your chance to show us that there's something to have some hope for in the near future. So I do think there is a lot of pressure on this offense to go out and get some points early, to give fans hope, but also to give this coaching staff a chance to evaluate some of those younger players in a game situation. And that's really important for their just the whole team's long-term development and your developmental program, and that's really important going forward.
Yeah, I think you're doing a good job of not letting me get the cart again ahead of the horse, because you're absolutely right. Like, for some of these guys to play, Iowa's going to have to, put themselves in a position where they can handle a little more risk than normal. And I think that, to me, we look at it from kind of a broad perspective. Kirk Ferentz, and I've been thinking about the quarterback situation a lot, but like, to me, he's always going to try and win the game in front of him, and in some ways that's a blessing, because I don't think there's a game that Iowa can't necessarily win, but it's also a curse in that you're not going to see those developmental situations outside of, oh, the game's in hand, let's roll some of these guys out. So I think Kennett could very much be on edge tonight, for a lot of the reasons that you described, and I'm certainly optimistic. But again, what does good look like? Like, I think that's also the struggle that I come back to, because, hey, as you just kind of laid it out, a 23-3 win, that's great. That's a win. It's more points than Iowa scored in their 2 games this season, more points that they would have scored since, I think, the Penn State game, with Petras at least as quarterback. And that's all well and good, but in the context of the season, it's maybe not that good. I'm also kind of using a Kirk phrase when Spencer Petras has a ton of equity build up, but like, from a fan sentiment, he's past due on some of these payments. So if we see him and the offense play really well, it's like, okay, all right, that's now you're only 5 months behind and not 6. Like, that's, I think, where ultimately the sentiment around Iowa football is just in such a weird place because I don't know if there's necessarily a uh, result today that could um, get Iowa fans broadly optimistic for the rest of the season.
That's 100% what kind of my thought is. I want to see some progress in terms of I want to see the offense look more in sync. I mentioned I want to see consecutive positive plays, and I shared in our Slack so far this season. Iowa's had 6 times all year where 2 plays have been a positive PPA, so points, basically positive points expected. So if you're in that situation, what is the very average play nationwide? What's the net outcome of that play? And only 6 times this season has Iowa had 2 plays in a row where they were quote unquote above national average for that given scenario. And I want to see some improvement there. Obviously, I want to see just the pass game and the run games take a step forward. But I'm with you. There is no outcome here where I see it as like a win situation for this offense. They could put up 40 points, and no matter what, people are going to be like, well, it's Nevada. They just lost to Incarnate Word. And is that fair? Yes and no. Like, there's going to have to be more than one game showing of productivity to make us think there's hope in that end. I think of last year's Maryland game, all the things that went Iowa's way in that game. And, you know, you could, if you left that game saying, oh, yeah, the offense, they've started to figure out we're on the right track. And you go forward in 2 of Iowa's next 3 games, they scored 7 points. So seeing it once, I don't think is going to be enough for fans to say, okay, there is this clear path forward. But I also think if you look at it in very lower level, if you can see some of those positives in this game, you can say, okay, I think I can see where it's not necessarily even an average offense, but it's an offense that's capable of getting to 7 or 8 wins. And that's what I hope to see is there a hope that this offense can do enough to get this team to 8 wins? Is that even feasible in any sense? And I think we'll get some feedback there. And if Reganey and or Keegan Johnson play some, I don't expect them to play a lot, but it sounds like they're trending toward possibly playing some. That's also going to help give us a little bit of an indication on that. The only thing I think we know for sure following this is, well, I say that and then I'm going to contradict myself, is like, if it's bad again, is it enough for them to finally just make the change at quarterback? Which some of the rumblings this week sounded like they had decided to make a change, and then after sleeping on it, the next day went back to Petrus. So that's kind of where I'm at. Is do we see enough for them to either stick or change?
Yeah, that I think is maybe the final point, because it's a great one to add. Is at the end of the day, are we going to know who Iowa's 2022 quarterback is going to be? Because I think this is really, in my view, the best get right game from that position. And, you know, even if when you kind of play the season out, well, do we really want to throw, Alex Padilla out for, a start at Rutgers, and then Michigan, and then Illinois, and then you got the bye week. So it's like there's not necessarily, this was the time to make that change. And, whatever rumblings happened, and it's kind of weird that everything seemed to be trending that direction from a chatter perspective and not come to fruition. But we've both been Iowa fans long enough to know that Kirk is nothing if not stubborn. And I don't know that he's necessarily going to go down with the ship, but Spencer Petras is getting every opportunity to show that he can turn it around. And for better or for worse, we're probably going to find out if we reach that point tonight. And in some ways that's maybe the thing to look out for, as much as, okay, can it be a net enjoyable experience? And then do we know what quarterback is going to look like for the rest of the year?
Absolutely. And I think in the Slack, you mentioned something that really stuck out to me and I thought was perfectly said is Kirk is always going to play to win the game in front of him. And it doesn't matter if he thinks Petrus is 1% better or 80% better. Better is better to him. So in his mind, why would I consider playing the guy who I don't believe is better? Whether or not that's true or not, whether that person is better or not, if he believes this guy is any percentage, 1 to 100, if he thinks he's better, why do anything differently? And I understand that train of thought, but I also think, as everybody's mentioned, there is this massive body of work that says this is really, really bad. What could it be any worse? And if so, why not? But yeah, to go back to your statement, I'm just a net enjoyable experience is definitely a good way of putting my outlook or my hope for this game.
Absolutely. Well, Thad, we're like right at 30 minutes. I appreciate you joining as we've done every week this season. I think it's been a lot of fun, even if the games haven't necessarily been fun. So, any final thoughts before we wrap this up?
No, I hope everybody just can enjoy their day. If there's some good offense, enjoy it now because you don't know what this evening's gonna look like. And yeah, that's about it for today.
Awesome. Well, you can follow Thad at tnels20. I'm Harrison Star, HD_star. Thanks everyone for joining along. This will be on the podcast network. We'll have something this evening. Don't know if it'll be the regular cast and crew, but I plan on popping on after the game and recording the podcast so that it can be put onto the podcast network as well. So thanks everyone for listening. Go Hawks, and have a great day.